The media keeps saying that she hasn't been convicted of anything. And my answer is, that's great. The law says it's just cause. So explain what constitutes cause.
Look, the Federal Reserve, more generally speaking, Sean, coming from just a bread and butter, originalist, constitutional law 101 perspective, the Federal Reserve is in Article 1 of the Constitution, the Congress. It is in Article 2 of the Constitution, the Executive Branch. It is in Article 3 of the Constitution, the Judiciary, or it doesn't exist at all. This notion that there is anything that is outside of the normal chain of command of Article 2 of the Constitution, the Executive Branch, is completely and utterly preposterous there. So I say this. I say that Donald Trump has the ability to fire Lisa Cook and, frankly, anyone he wants at the Fed or literally any other agency in D.C., period, full stop, end of story, or the Fed or that other agency is unconstitutional.
All right, guys, it is Tuesday. Now, here's the reason I say this. Obviously, it's the day of the week. It's Tuesday before Labor Day, a 3-day weekend. This is August. D.C. is normally like, hollowed out. Everybody's off on vacation. And it's like the president's holding a cabinet meeting. He went on a stem winder yesterday, meeting with the press, talking about everything he's doing. This is August. Not just does DC hollow out, especially the week before Labor Day, but I think a lot of people do. This is when they get in that last-minute vacation, time at the beach, just a couple days off, maybe doing some last-minute yard work, cleaning up the house, whatever, before kids head back to school. Although here in Virginia, they are back to school. But my point is that, like, this guy's just a machine. And it's unbelievable. Well, a lot happening, and we're going to talk to Josh Hammer of the Article 3 Project. Always brings it. I mean, I love this guy. His knowledge of the Constitution is great, and everyone keeps asking, and there's a lot going on. The president talking about flag burning yesterday, firing one of the Fed governors, Lisa Cook. She's fighting back, saying it's illegal. We'll talk about that. So there's a lot to break down, and obviously today's another cabinet meeting. I love these cabinet meetings, and I think if you guys know, if you've watched before, you know why. And the reason is that when I know the media loves to go, oh, it was like a major press conference. Okay, fine. But they're missing the point. He goes around the table and he asks everyone to do a quick update. To me, that is like a report card to the nation as to what each of these individuals, they're being held accountable publicly. It's not like they're sending him a note or an email. Here's what I did this week, Mr. President. You have to get there and say, these are the things I'm working on to implement the America First agenda to make the country better, stronger, more prosperous, whatever, safer. I love it. I love it because every single one of them puts points on the board and they know they have to. There's a degree of accountability. In the Biden White House, he didn't even know who you were. They never talked to him. We literally are seeing that. I didn't bring this up before, but it was funny because Ian Sams, who was one of the top spokespeople from Biden. Remember, he was one of these guys that went out and told us all who talked about or questioned the president's mental and physical acuity. Ian Sams was one of the people that chided us. Well, under oath last week when the House committee talked to him, he said that he only spoke to Biden twice, ever. Twice. So the guy that wanted to tell us we were wrong never actually was in the room with the guy. I saw a president twice before 9 a.m. most days. It's pretty amazing, though. But I love these cabinet meetings because we get to see and hear what they're all responsible for, what they're doing, how they're moving the agenda forward. So anyway, last night, though, I mean, just when I thought I had a ton of stuff to talk about today, and I do, and a lot of it's like you get Josh Hammer's going to be a great guest because we're going to break down the legality of all this. But the president last night announced that he's firing a Fed governor. Her name is Lisa Cook. She is the one that FHA, Federal Housing Administration Director Bill Pulte, keeps putting out the receipts, as the kids like to say, showing that she lied on mortgage documents. She claimed her house was one place and it wasn't because she wanted her primary house because she wanted a lower mortgage rate. That's illegal. That's called mortgage fraud. So he fired her last night. The president did. Biden had appointed her to a 13-year term. Now, here's the thing that the media is getting wrong and gaslighting you. They keep saying she isn't convicted of anything. That's great. You don't have to be. It doesn't say that you have to be convicted to be removed. It says the president has to have cause. Well, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Anyone in a workplace knows this. HR will come down and say, you were late 5 days in a row. You aren't adhering to the dress code. That's cause. So we're firing you. Doesn't mean that you were guilty of some crime. It means that you did something wrong. And by the way, I believe wholeheartedly that this is exactly why the president visited the Fed, because he's laying up the predicate for cause. Here's like, if I want to fire Jerome Powell now, guess what? I have cause. You mismanaged. The thing that the media is not getting is that you don't have to convict somebody. You just have to, the law just says you have to have cause. What is the reason? Justify mismanagement, lying, fraud. Maybe you never showed up to work. That's cause. It's workplace cause, and he has it. And the court will uphold that because he just has to demonstrate that he needed a good reason, that he had cause for firing the person. Not that they actually committed a crime, which is what the media wants you to believe is true. It's not. They're gaslighting you again. And by the way, why are all these people defending Bill Pulte on Twitter, on X, has been putting out these receipts? Here are the actual documents that she filed, and here's the truth, and here's how that conflicts. Why is the media defending mortgage fraud? Because did they commit it themselves? Or are they worried that they're going to get caught next? Adam Schiff, Letitia James, all of these folks. In the case of Adam Schiff and Letitia James, they lied about where their home was. Schiff claimed Maryland. Well, he represents California in the Senate. It would be illegal, a violation, because he has to live in the state. You get a lower interest rate if it's your primary residence. So that's why he did it. Same thing with Letitia James. She's the Attorney General of New York. You can't live in another state and claim that's your primary resident and be elected to represent another state. Doesn't work that way. But the media wants you to think that he's got all sorts of retribution. These folks actually lied. They committed fraud. Donald Trump did, they had to make up charges against him, if you recall. In New York, the statute of limitations had expired on these misdemeanors, and yet they conjured them all up to create a fake felony. It was a joke. They told the jury, you don't even have to have a reason to convict the guy. You don't have to find him guilty of a particular crime, just that you don't like him. In this case, it's legit. These people, the evidence is there. They filed papers. They lied. Anyway, this is going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. And I'm telling you, by the way, I got off on a tangent on that Fed chair. She's pushing back, said it's illegal. I'm going to ask Josh Hammer about this because I don't understand what's illegal about it. He has the right. The law says he has cause. But Powell, by the way, this is what people are missing too. This is the test case, folks. Because he's got the same standard with Jerome Powell, the Fed chair. It says he has to have cause to fire him. Okay. He went and visited the Fed the other day. He talked about the massive cost overruns. He's going to say, hey, but this was a warning. This was a shot across the bow to Powell. I know how to do this. Remember, in the first term, we fired Comey. And I'll admit, it was a bit sloppy and haphazard. We hadn't thought it all the way through. We were new. This time, though, they thought it through. They know exactly what they're doing. They looked at the statutes governing how they could dismiss the person. They made a concrete case. They laid it out publicly for us all to see. Anyway, it's going to be funny. It will go to the court. It will come down in his favor. No question about it. Because again, it doesn't say he has to be convicted. It just says that he has to have cause. This looks like cause to me, mortgage fraud. So, by the way, Jerome Powell, you got a lot coming your way. The president, by the way, yesterday, making it very clear that flag burning is going to be met with the force of law. Now, here's the thing, and this is what I'm going to get into a discussion with Josh Hammer about. A lot of people overreacted to this. And I know why. I find flag burning abhorrent, disgusting. But I've spent over 2 decades in the military to defend it because you have to protect what you don't like. The left will never understand this. The whole thesis of the First Amendment is that we protect free speech, no matter how abhorrent you find it. The left wants to cancel and censor you. I think we're better than that. But what the president did in the executive order yesterday didn't ban flag burning. If you look at the actual text of the executive order, what it says is if it incites violence, then that can be the predicate to go after somebody. So you can't just sit there, burn a flag, and go to jail. That's free speech. That's protected. I'm going to get Josh Hammer to weigh in on this because I find it fascinating. I'm intrigued by this whole thing. The other thing that I want to get him to weigh in on is the president and Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, are talking about getting this 10% stake in Intel. I'm just going to tell you this right now. I'm excited for President Trump. He's a businessman. He's a deal maker. And I know this is a great deal for the United States. It's a billions of dollar company, $10-11 billion company. This is a big deal. But here's what I worry about. And this is the same thing with flag burning and a lot of this other stuff. What happens when Donald Trump's not there? How would the left use this to weaponize it? What if the left took ownership in gun companies and then started to say they can't sell guns here and there because we are now an owner of them? I worry about the long-term predicate of this. And I'm going to ask Josh Hammer to tell me where I'm wrong on this, because I get it. I trust Donald Trump right now. We've got 3 more years. Who's next? What do they do? How do they manipulate this? Whatever happens if the Democrats get back in the White House, what will they do to weaponize stuff? I worry about these things. And I think as much as I trust Donald Trump to do the right thing now, I do worry about the long-term stuff. There's a lot of other stuff going on, though. Trump killed an unbelievably, you guys remember I posted this stuff on my Instagram page. And I talked with Rick Perry about this yesterday. These stupid wind farms, they're disgusting. They're both just unsightly. They really are environmentally so displeasing, and I don't know why the left would like them. But the ones off the shore, which the president has now killed, these massive offshore projects, first one off the coast of Rhode Island, and now apparently one off the coast of Maryland. The reason is that, here's the thing. I know the left loves to pretend that these things are actually going to give us power. They don't. We know that as a fact, and Rick Perry said so yesterday. But the other thing that we need to know is that they're bad for the environment. For all these lefties, they are horrible when they fall apart and fall into the water. They're literally, you can't touch them. They're made of some kind of fiberglass. It's horrible. It's horrible for marine life. It kills fish and whales and dolphins and all sorts of stuff. It's such a BS concept. I cannot believe the left has snowballed us. They want to feel so good about wind power. By the way, you can sit there and watch how many days during any given week when there's no wind, they just sit there idle. But when they fall apart and disintegrate, you can't do anything, right? Rick Perry was talking about all the ones that they had in Puerto Rico that had fallen down and were still there. They're horrible. They're stupid. By the way, the other thing that came out over the weekend that was amazing that really didn't get a ton of coverage is all these tariffs that the president has been implementing has resulted in the reduction of the debt they claim over a period of time. I think it's a 10-year window. The debt will be reduced by $4 trillion. Trillion. Just think about that for a second. No one wants to talk about that, do they? They don't want to let you know the good things that are happening. Not only are we holding other countries accountable and getting market access for the first time, which is great, $4 trillion in reducing the debt. I find it amazing. They hate his policy so much, but they don't want to tell you what the upside is. Anyway, JD Vance over the weekend, I didn't have time to bring this up yesterday, was on Meet the Press putting on another masterclass. And he talked about why Republicans are doing this redistricting stuff. And by the way, next Tuesday, day after Labor Day, I'm going to have a great conversation about California redistricting. They're talking about raising upwards of $100 million to fight back. So you got Schwarzenegger and Kevin McCarthy and the former California State Party Chairman, Jessica Malone Patterson. 2 different groups, but they're going to raise collectively $100 million to fight back on this, which is, by the way, a lot of money. And I wonder if it's money that we are wasting, meaning that's waste money we can't sit on races, but now we got to defend these 5 seats. Anyway, she's going to be here. We'll talk about that. So be prepared for that discussion to find out where we are with California, because I wonder whether Gavin Newsom can even put this off. But Vance is on Meet the Press over the weekend explaining why these maps are so important, why we should not and will not back down. Let me show you what he had to say.
You have to ask yourself, why have Democrats gerrymandered their states aggressively over the past 10 to 20 years? If you look, for example, at the popular vote in a lot of these states, and Massachusetts, where 32% of the residents of Massachusetts voted for Republicans, 0 Republican federal representatives. So we're not trying to all we're doing, frankly, is trying to make the situation a little bit more fair on a national scale. The Democrats have gerrymandered their states really aggressively. We think there are opportunities to push back against that, and that's really all we're doing.
By the way, he also address, this issue of illegals voting and why it matters. We talked about this, that I don't think it's fully appreciated by a lot of folks, that our census doesn't just count citizens. It counts people in this country illegally. And what that does is not just do I think eventually ends up trying to put these people on a path to citizenship so they can vote, but in the short term, it helps determine how many representatives you get, how many people you send to Congress. California right now has 52 members of Congress because they claim that population, they divvy it up, and that's how many. But how many of those people are actually citizens? How many people is California getting to send to Washington versus, say, another state? Because it's not citizens that they're being told they're in the state, but illegal aliens. And the vice president made this point as well on Meet the Press. Let me show you.
We had way fewer House seats than we should have. One, if the Democrats hadn't aggressively gerrymandered, and two, if illegal aliens weren't counted in the census for purposes of apportioning congressional seats. The best estimates I've seen is that in California, for example, has 5 additional congressional seats than it should have because they count illegal aliens for the purpose of apportioning representatives. Meanwhile, Ohio, my home state, lost a representative. We're literally losing representatives for American citizens in order to give congressional representation to illegal aliens. Republicans are trying to balance out the scales a little bit for basic fairness and for the integrity of our democracy, which the president cares about as much as anybody in the country.
If I have time, I'm going to talk to Josh Hammer about that too, because it is so interesting how little coverage it gets, but it's such a big, big issue. All right, a couple of housekeeping items. As I said, Josh Hammer from Article 3 Project coming up to break down all the legality of this stuff. Tomorrow, though, J. Christian Adams on election integrity. Guys, if you care about our elections, election integrity, you're going to want to hear this conversation because J. Christian Adams and his group have been at the forefront. Remember the other day when Harmeet Dillon was talking about this case in Galveston that triggered all the redistricting? That's his group. These guys have been suing people. They've been literally showing and exposing how dead people are registering to vote and are on the voter rolls. And no one seems to care. Literally, J. Christian Adams and his group are taking photos and showing this. That's how bad this is. For all the gaslighting that we get, if you care about elections and election integrity, tomorrow is going to be your show. And then on Thursday, an amazing panel with Christina Bobb, Emily Sturge from Campus Reporting, and our friend Caroline Downey over at National Review Online. So it's going to be awesome. And then Friday, John Solomon will be here. I want to say thank you, though, to everybody who's been going to Spotify and Apple and giving us shout outs, 5-star reviews. I get it. A lot of you watch on YouTube or Rumble or X, and I appreciate that. Thank you for spreading the word. The growth has been amazing as we hit the 2-year mark. But when you go do the audio stuff, even if you don't listen, just go subscribe and hit that 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. It really does help. And I can't tell you how much I love it. Let me just kind of show you what I'm talking about. Because if you do go do this, who knows, maybe you get a shout out. And this one goes to JM CIVQAZ. So obviously it's not a name, but I just want to show it to you. This is the review that I got. Voices you don't hear anyone else. 5 stars. Sean, of course, has great inside knowledge from his time as President Trump's press secretary, but he also has many great relationships with those who work around the administration that you never hear about. He leverages those relationships to bring his content you won't hear anywhere else. 5 stars. Totally agree. Thank you. That's why I love this show, because I can leverage those contacts and relationships. And I'm telling you, the September to remember is coming your way. I'm leveraging those to call some of the people that I know at the highest levels to come on this show and bring you insight. By the way, I got another one from KACEEFLA. So I assume it's Florida, maybe Casey in Florida. I don't know. It doesn't say, but I'm going to say anyway. It says, great show. Sean has such great perspective. I enjoy his program and all his guests. Look forward to the next show. Thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time just to go over to Apple and Spotify again. Just hit that subscription button, 5-star review. Even if you don't listen, it just shows growth. It's super helpful, especially if you're just watching on YouTube or Rumble, and continue to do what you can. Always join us in that 6 o'clock premiere on YouTube. We have fun in the chat. So many great people sharing their ideas and insight. All right, before I get into it with Josh Hammer, I want to tell you, if you are looking for a great way to just take your food to the next level, you've got to try Firecracker Farm hot salt. Oh my goodness. This stuff has got 3 peppers in this shaker that you get with it. It is unbelievable. It's got Ghost, Reaper, and Scorpion peppers. Now, I know that may sound, they're called the 3 Kings, by the way. Those are like the 3 peppers. But I want to just, as a guy who loves spicy food, I want to just give you my blanket warning on this. It's not hot. It's just bold, powerful flavor. I put it on eggs, vegetables, steaks. You can put it on anything. Chicken. Oh yeah, maybe got to add it to the chicken. Salads, but it's a shaker. You click the top, it comes right in. It is so good. And by the way, Megyn Kelly's been talking about this. Joe Rogan's been talking about it. It sells out all the time because this is a American family-owned small business. So it's small batch. So it sells out and then they'll try to restock it. But right now it's back in and it's got this very balanced flavor that comes in the stainless steel push grinder that I talked about. Every click is just another burst of flavor that you won't get anywhere else. It was sold out before Father's Day and is back in now. So if you are interested, go to firecracker.farm. Firecracker.farm. Go to firecracker.farm and use code SPICER for a discount. This is just for our watchers. So go to firecracker.farm, not edu, not org, not .com, firecracker.farm. Use code SPICER for a discount. All right. You guys have heard me talk for years now. I can actually say for years because the show's been on for 2 years. My buddy Leo Grillo at Delta Rescue. The work that Leo Grillo and Delta Rescue do to take care of all sorts of animals, dogs, cats, horses, you name it, that have been abandoned, abused, neglected, malnutrition. It's a no-kill sanctuary, the world's largest, not a shelter. Leo is not looking to find new homes for these animals. He'll take them all in. That's how much this guy loves it. It started with one dog that he rescued, and now has become the world's largest no-kill sanctuary. But here's the kicker. Leo Grillo does not get big USAID government grants or Politico Pro subscriptions to fund his thing. It is all through the donations of people like me and you. And when I say me and you, I mean it because I made a personal donation to Leo Grillo at deltarescue.org because I believe so much in what Leo is doing. He's a great guy with a great mission. I would just ask you, go to deltarescue.org. Please consider a personal contribution to the great work that he's doing. And then at the top, you'll see this estate planning kit. Click that because you might get some kind of financial benefit in the here and now after you talk with your financial advisor. If we can make this an enduring mission by looking at 401k or an old stock that you have, but just click on it, think about it, but do me a favor in the short term, make a donation at deltarescue.org for the great work that Leo Grillo is doing. All right. Without further ado, I want to bring in my buddy, the senior counsel at the Article 3 Project and the host of the Josh Hammer Show, Mr. Josh Hammer. Josh, good to see you again. Boy, do I have a list for you. This is what happens when the guy who's legal training is all from watching Law and Order and needs to talk to a real attorney. So thank you for being here.
You bet. Always a pleasure, Sean. Thank you.
All right, let's stop at the top of the list. Last night, President fires Lisa Cook, the Fed governor. This is what I have been saying all day today, so tell me if I'm wrong. The media keeps saying that she hasn't been convicted of anything. And my answer is, that's great. The law says it's just cause. So explain what the what's the level that you I don't know, like what constitutes cause?
Okay, so there's various levels here. First of all, the notion that a federal employee has to be convicted of a crime in order to justify the chief executive, the guy who actually wields the executive power, the notion that there has to be a crime for the president to fire that subordinates in Article 2 of the Constitution is utterly ludicrous. Now even kind of taking it as it is, this purported statutory requirement that certain federal employees must be fired for a cause, Sean. Cause obviously and transparently does not mean that you have to be indicted, convicted. If that's what they meant, they would have said that. The statute would very clearly say that a federal employee can be fired upon being indicted or convicted or various other levels of the entire criminal justice process, which is a pretty lengthy process. What about appeal? I mean, there's a lot of intricacies here. The drafters of the statute would have specified that. Rather, for cause really just means that you just need a legitimate cause here. And on its face, what Lisa Cook is doing when it comes to mortgage fraud strikes me as a pretty reasonable cause there. It's worth noting, by the way, that Lisa Cook was only confirmed on a 50-50 vote with Kamala Harris casting the tie-breaking vote. This is someone whose qualifications have been considered pretty dubious for a long time there. I mean, not even Murkowski, Collins, none of the squishy Republicans even cast a vote for her to be a Fed governor. But I think the most important point here, Sean, to make there, and this is kind of coming from a structural constitutional perspective, I don't think you even need this statutory for-cause requirement. To the extent that Congress enacts any hurdles whatsoever to attempt to inhibit the president's ability to manage his or her executive branch, to hire and fire employees as he or she sees fit, to the extent that a statute purports to do that, that statute is facially unconstitutional, period, full stop, end of story. And we've already seen some interesting rulings over the first 7-8 months thus far of this Trump administration that kind of indicate that the Supreme Court is probably likely getting prepared to make a sweeping ruling along those lines. There's actually a case from the 1930s here that has been very much in the crosshairs of us legal eagles for a very long time. It's called Humphrey's Executor, which is kind of one of the infamous New Deal FDR era cases from the mid-1930s that says that Congress can legitimately inhibit the president's ability to fire executive branch employees under certain circumstances. But as part of the litigation earlier this year against Gwen Wilcox, who was a Biden nominee, a Democrat nominee to the National Labor Relations Board, the Supreme Court actually seemed to green light President Trump's ability to dismiss Gwen Wilcox. So there's a lot of favorable tea leaves out there. And I guess I'll just end on this. Look, the Federal Reserve, more generally speaking, Sean, coming from just a bread and butter, originalist, constitutional law 101 perspective, the Federal Reserve is in Article 1 of the Constitution, the Congress. It is in Article 2 of the Constitution, the Executive Branch. It is in Article 3 of the Constitution, the Judiciary, or it doesn't exist at all. This notion that there is anything that is outside of the normal chain of command of Article 2 of the Constitution, the Executive Branch, is completely and utterly preposterous there. So I say this. I say that Donald Trump has the ability to fire Lisa Cook and, frankly, anyone he wants at the Fed or literally any other agency in D.C., period, full stop, end of story, or the Fed or that other agency is unconstitutional.
Would you, if you were going in front of the Supreme Court, I'm just asking this objectively, based on all of your constitutional law training, would you cite the case of Spicer v. Biden at all?
I think it's a totally legitimate point. I mean, Sean, I'm not as familiar with the cases you are, but based on my memory of the details there, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here, right? I mean, we're
well, Biden fired me. We sued him through America First Legal. We went to the appeals process, and the court, all the way through the appeals process, affirmed that the president of the United States had the right to fire people that he named to stuff.
Exactly right. Yeah, look, I mean, that's very clever, actually, right? I mean, that would be a very clever way to try and make that point there. But, I mean, this is bread and butter Article 2 core constitutional power stuff. I mean, if the executive power does not entail the ability to make all personnel decisions, hiring, firing within the executive branch, then the executive power means nothing at all. It is the absolute crux, the bread and butter of what the executive power entails. You, by definition, are not an executive if you don't have plenary sweeping ability to control the literal people constituting your branch. So then applying that to the Federal Reserve, again, the Federal Reserve either sits comfortably within this well-established Article 2 executive branch chain of commands, or the Federal Reserve is off in la-la land, in no man's land there, and that's taking us to a very interesting place there. You know, I guess it's just one final historical note. Sean, a lot of people are freaking out about this. Oh my God, Donald Trump is acting like a fascist, a dictator there. I mean, you know, consider opening up a book of American history. I mean, presidents warring with central banks goes back a really, really long time. I mean, Andrew Jackson, the second Bank of the United States, are you kidding me? I mean, John Marshall and the Federalist Party versus Thomas Jefferson, the first bank back in the 18 teens. You know, this notion that presidents, that it is dictatorial or fascist who try to get involved here when it comes to the central bank. I mean, literally just open a history book, for goodness sake.
So the interesting, just like what I want to underscore though is when we talk about cause, because I loved your description at the beginning, but just to be clear, if you're an employee and you don't show up to work for 5 days in a row, or you don't abide by the dress code, or you misuse email or some company resource, maybe you use the copier to make stuff, right? That's cause, right?
Totally. 100%. It is subjective in the eye of the beholder.
Okay, so Bill Pulte, who is the federal housing director, has literally put out the receipts, as the kids say, literally listed this mortgage issue. So can you just explain, to the extent that you know, like, what is he saying that she did?
So she's listed in multiple places as her principal residence, and she took out multiple mortgages for $200,000+, and then she went ahead and then rented out those homes and did not disclose the income on those homes. So there's a failure to disclose. There is a failure here when it comes to be honest about principal place of residence, which has implications when it comes to getting a more favorable interest rate for the mortgage in general there. This is totally legitimate for cause, Sean. I mean, the notion that this is not a legitimate cause there strikes me as preposterous. I mean, what is a legitimate cause if it is not this? I mean, do you have to literally murder someone in cold blood in the streets of Washington D.C. and have Donald Trump's National Guard arrest you? I mean, it's pretty preposterous stuff, I think.
But I just want to underscore what you just said, because I back in the late 90s bought a couple investment properties, and if it's not your principal place of residence, the interest rate that you get charged is higher. And there's also, by the way, additional down payment requirements. If it's an investment property, it's usually 20%. If it's your primary residence, depending on the type of loan, it's lower. So that's legitimate fraud, right?
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. So if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Georgia and Michigan were the two states where she listed her primary place of residence there. You can't do that. I mean, like, you literally have one primary place of residence there. So you are defrauding a financial institution, which, by the way, just to kind of make an obvious point, we're talking here about a governor on the Federal Reserve. I mean, the nation's central bank there. So, I mean, of all people to be engaged in defrauding financial institutions, I mean, that's pretty ironic for that particular post, is it not?
Yeah, and it's interesting because they're going after Adam Schiff, Letitia James, and now this FedGov, Lisa Cook, for all the same thing, which is, and the funny part is, Josh, I said this a minute ago when I was opening the show, but like when they went after Donald Trump, they literally cooked up charges, made things up that had expired according to statute of limitations. But in these cases, this is legitimate mortgage fraud. Adam Schiff says he's a United States Senator from California. The Constitution requires that you live in that state.
Right.
And if he's listing in the mortgage application that his primary residence is Maryland, or Letitia James says that it's in Virginia when she's the Attorney General of New York, that is like election fraud, mortgage fraud. There's a lot there. That's legitimate, though.
Yeah, and, look, it's kind of funny, for lack of a better word, that all of these high-profile Democrats are being investigated for the same thing at the same time there. It does make you kind of wonder, was it potentially orchestrated? Were they sharing talking points? Were they sharing tips or anything there? I don't really know the details of that there, but it's fraud. It is legitimate fraud. Look, Sean, I can't speak to this personally yet. I'm not a homeowner yet myself there, but I know that when I go to seek out a mortgage, God willing, on our first home here, over the next, 2-3 years, whatever the case may be there, I'm going to list this as my principal place of residence in partial part because I want to get a lower interest rate there. This is a very common thing. I think it's pretty ubiquitous, actually. I think people who are looking to buy homes for themselves as opposed to rental properties there, this is just, it's a pretty common bit of knowledge there. And again, for someone like Lisa Cook, who is literally serving on the nation's central bank, the ultimate lender of last resort when it comes to trying to prevent 2007, 2008 style financial crises there, for her to be specifically involved here in defrauding financial institutions, for violating what is a deeply common, if not ubiquitously known rule when it comes to listing a principal place of residence there, it is dripping with irony. It is absolutely fraudulent and is 1,000% a legitimate cause to dismiss her.
So her response was the following. President Trump purported to fire me, quote, for cause, when no cause exists under the law and he has no authority to do so. I will not resign. I will continue to carry out my duties to help the American economy as I've been doing since 2022. Her attorney, Abby Lowell, who represented a ton of controversial figures in the past, put out a statement as well saying that this was illegal. Can you comment on both? Did he have the authority and was it legal?
Yeah, Sean, I think Abby Lowell also was defending Hunter Biden, if I'm not mistaken, during the gun prosecution in Delaware. So,
yes.
Lowell has a history here, shall we say, of defending a lot of less than fully reputable clients there. I mean, again, I kind of go back to the earlier part of our conversation, which is, I mean, when they say cause, Congress, when they're drafting a statute here, and again, I kind of object on a principle basis to the very existence of these statutes for kind of bread and butter Article 2 executive power reasons. But even conceding that these statutes exist there, Congress, when they want to be specific, Sean, they have no problem getting very specific with the language there. So if they want to say that an individual who is alleged in the public sphere for potentially committing XYZ crimes, that he or she can only be fired for a cause upon being indicted by a grand jury or convicted in a criminal court, a state court, federal court, they literally would have said that there. I mean, this notion that for cause requires some figment of our imagination there. I mean, what about a misdemeanor or felony there? I mean, is Abby Lowell saying that would have have to be a felony? Well, what about if it's only a misdemeanor? Is that cause there? I mean, again, if they wanted that kind of granular specifics, they would have put it in there. I think when Congress was drafting this law, they probably had kind of in the back of their mind this implicit understanding that they were already kind of getting into dangerous territory and trying to kind of throw up hurdles and obstacles to the president's ability to dismiss insubordinate employees there. So they probably understood that we're going to get in this sordid business of all of trying to inhibit the executive branch there. The least we can do is kind of put in these vague words and allow the executive to interpret that a little more subjectively there. And then for all the reasons that we've discussed already there, this is 1,000% a legitimate cause, at least in my personal opinion.
All right, I want one more question on this, and then I want to move on. We got a lot to talk about. This is what the New York Times wrote about this. It said the New York Times respected legal guru Adam Liptak has a go at answering the question that, noting that the Supreme Court decisions have largely upheld Trump's right to fire government officials, which is what you said. The justices have also been clear that the Fed is a very different beast. Instead, the rule suggests needs due cause, which I don't know what that's different than cause, but due cause to fire a central bank governor. And given Cook has not even faced formal charges, let alone been convicted of anything, Liptak concludes that Trump is probably overstretched. That conflicts with everything that you and I just agreed on is actually probably true.
So I think the interesting question, and this is an interesting academic question that could soon potentially see some very legitimate litigation and potentially an extremely high-profile SCOTUS case. But the very interesting question, and one that I have been wondering and debating since my very first days of law school, is what is the Federal Reserve exactly? I mean, is the Federal Reserve simply the latest incarnation of the original Bank of the United States that was upheld in McCulloch versus Maryland, the famous John Marshall case in 1819? Is that simply what the Fed is? Or is the Fed something different? And the history of the Fed, that when it came into being during the Woodrow Wilson administration, 1913, 1914, right around then, Woodrow Wilson is the godfather essentially of the American administrative state. He is the OG administrative state bureaucracy guy. So the Federal Reserve, when I kind of read the history of the Federal Reserve there, it was intended to be an agency in the administrative state, just like all these various other alphabet soup agencies there. So from that vantage point, there's nothing particularly different about the Fed than the DOJ, Department of Labor, any of these organizations there, literally any of them there. And from that vantage point, the notion that the president does not have core Article 2 authority to make hiring and firing decisions is utterly preposterous. So I think that Lisa Cook's defenders, they're going to have to get on very interesting historical ground and basically try to make the argument that, no, the Fed actually is qualitatively different than all these other federal agencies there. It's not necessarily in the executive branch. It's not necessarily part of the Congress, the judiciary there. It's kind of just an independent, kind of quasi-private charter there, analogous to the original Bank of the United States, kind of, sort of there. It's potentially setting up for a genuinely, for us constitutional law nerds and us American history nerds, potentially genuinely intellectually stimulating Supreme Court litigation. But again, my reading of the history of the Fed was that this was intended to be very similar to all the rest of the administrative state there. And from that vantage point, the president has Article 2 ability to make personnel decisions just like any other agency.
All right, I got a bunch of topics that I want to hit real quick in the time that we have remaining. But one last question. When she walks in the door, if she tries to go to work today, I know you're not the head of HR, but as a lawyer, what would you have told HR? Do you let her back in the building until it's adjudicated, or do you say you're fired until the court rules otherwise?
If I were giving the Trump White House advice there, I think that's a legitimate, keep her out of the building situation there. I mean, okay. Look, I mean, what's the point of firing her unless you're going to actually fire her, right?
No. But I mean, if you're the Fed, so you're Chairman Jerome Powell, and she says, I'm fighting President Trump on this, I'm coming to work today. Do you go, hey, until you get the court to rule in your favor, I can't let you back in the building? Or do you say, great, I'll let you back in the building until Trump fights it out? Like, someone's got to win on that.
So, this is another interesting question. So my own theory of constitutional interpretation is that all three branches, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, have an independent obligation to interpret and enforce the Constitution. So what that means, that the president has not just the ability, but indeed the obligation under his own oath of office to interpret and enforce the Constitution regardless of what the courts say. So from that vantage point, Donald Trump's word when it comes to the executive branch goes. But, I could see a world in which Jerome Powell might kind of take the old judicial supremacist view whereby nothing is official until a bare 5-4 majority of the court rules on it. That's just simply not my reading of the ultimate question of who gets to decide what the Constitution means.
Okay. Next thing, yesterday the president talked about flag burning. I think my interpretation of this, again, as the guy that never went to law school, is that while this 1989 law is very clear that you do have a constitutional right, as abhorrent as you and I or anyone else might find it, you do have a right to do it. But what the president did was nuance it, which said, if it incites violence, legal or not legal?
Sean, I would actually go even further than this executive order. I actually had a whole episode on this on my show earlier today, the Josh Hammer show. I actually think that Texas v. Johnson, which is the 1989 case, and then the companion case the very following year called U.S. versus Eichmann, these are both narrowly decided 5-4 decisions upholding the constitutionality of flag burning as protected speech. I actually disagree with those decisions because to me, the act of burning the American flag is not speech, it is conduct. It is the same type of any other kind of conduct there, especially in this particular case involving fire, blazes, arson, potentially kind of dangerous behavior there. That is totally the kind of thing that is not an absolutist First Amendment right and that ought to be regulated by various governments from the local government all the way up, I would argue, to the federal government itself. So I would actually go, frankly, even further than the Trump executive order, although I do love the notion that it's at least trying to potentially kind of sow some seeds of doubt, shall we say, in those two Supreme Court cases there. This kind of gets to what I was just saying a minute or two ago, which is that this is my theory that Article 2, the executive branch, has a robust obligation to interpret the Constitution according to its own understanding, as opposed to the courts. Very similar thing, by the way, when it comes to birthright citizenship. Again, the president can make these decisions for himself, regardless, essentially, of what the courts say, except when it comes to the literal named parties in an actual Article 3 case or controversy before the courts there. But with all that aside, and my kind of first principles disagreements on the Johnson-Eichmann cases there, yes, your understanding is correct that the executive order at face value is pretty narrow, actually, there. It does accept Texas v. Johnson for better or for worse. Again, I actually say for worse, but it does essentially accept Texas v. Johnson, says, but this is not applied to fighting words doctrine, incitement there. You know, the fighting words doctrine, this goes back to a 1942 case called Chaplinsky. This case gets invoked a lot. It's actually been watered down, to be honest with you, over the years. So it's not necessarily the most robust doctrine to cite to, if I'm being very honest there. It's maybe something of a stretch there, which is kind of why I actually take the, let's call it the more extreme position that this whole thing is actually wrong there. But, I mean, the point of this, Sean, as you and I know, is not necessarily kind of for the law here. I think why President Trump is doing this is just to make Democrats defend flag burning. I mean, it's a very, I mean, it's literally just a brilliant instance of Donald Trump yet again mastering the art of the 80-20 issue, let's call it.
It's funny, as you're saying it, I was thinking to myself, one angle of this, and again, I don't want to go, I got 3 more things I need to get you 1-minute answers on each, but it's like, okay, if you're lighting a fire outside, that might be regulated too. I mean, you can't just go light stuff on fire in the middle of the street, regardless of whether it's a flag or a piece of paper. All right, 60 seconds or less on each one. Intel, the president wants a 10% stake. I trust Donald Trump as a businessman and as a negotiator. I worry about the precedent this sets in the future. Are you concerned?
Potentially, but I'm not freaking out either. Look, I mean, public-private partnerships have a very long history in the United States there. I mean, the notion, Al Gore gets made fun of for saying that I invented the internet, but he was kind of making fun of this notion, which is a legitimate one, that the public-private partnership, the government did work hand in glove with private industry to develop the internet. There's a million examples. DARPA, exactly there. So, the notion that the government could be involved in helping these extremely important chip companies there to try to get us less reliant on Taiwanese chips, I don't have an issue with that. I do have an issue if the U.S. starts actually voting on its shares there. So that's kind of where I draw the line personally, but let's see how it goes, I guess.
Okay, next, Abrego Garcia. They want to deport him to Uganda. Does it matter where they deport? I mean, I guess my issue would be if you want to deport somebody and we're going to do it, I know we already tried it back to El Salvador where he's from, but I don't know how is it legal to send someone to a country that you're not from, to deport them? Is that legal?
Well, it just depends on the bilateral agreement that the United States has reached with that particular government, actually. But earlier this year in a case in June or July, I forgot the exact date, SCOTUS did uphold the legitimacy of these third-party removals, actually. So the only kind of debate right now, his lawyers are making a habeas corpus petition. That's why this radical lower court judge, Judge Zinnes, has granted a temporary injunction. But that injunction is going to expire. So his lawyers are basically arguing that it should be Costa Rica, not Uganda. That's ultimately going to be the debate here. Personally, I don't particularly care. I'll be honest with you, it really makes no difference to me as long as he's out of the United States.
Yeah, I'd rather go to Costa Rica than Uganda. I don't know. I haven't been to either, but I just assume I'd rather be in a Caribbean
Costa Rica's
country.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it is. I've heard great things. Many people are saying. All right, on the census, big discussion about JD talking about over the weekend, whether or not the impacts of counting illegals, right? You don't count diplomats in our census. You don't count tourists in our census. Why do we count people that are legal? Does the Commerce Department have standing when it comes to this to make it actually happen? So we only count citizens.
Yes, 1,000%. Well, so the citizens part is a little more complicated. So Section 2 of the 14th Amendment does say that all persons have to be counted. And notably, Section 2 of the 14th Amendment actually uses the separate word citizens like one or two sentences later. So kind of looking at that in tandem there, it does seem to me like they intend to be counted green card holders, permanent residents there. But that's the difference, right? Is between someone who is legally here, long-term basis, green card, LPR, versus a legal alien. If you're an illegal alien, you might physically be here, but legally speaking, Sean, you're not here. They should not be counted. Period, full stop, end of story.
All right, last subject that I want to cover. President Trump's deployed troops, National Guard troops, to D.C. By the way, I always tell people this. When you get off at Penn Station, New York, they're there too. So I don't know why all these Democrats are freaking out. They haven't said anything since 9/11 about them in New York City. But anyway, there's talk of sending them to other cities. D.C., in my mind, is very unique. How can the president, what authority does he have to send National Guard troops into states that isn't a violation?
So D.C. is totally unique. You're totally right about that, which is why you have this kind of broader federalization of the D.C. Metro Police. And D.C. was supposed to be a federal district. I mean, in my notion, the D.C. Home Rule Act of 1973, which is this experiment in D.C. governing itself, is probably facially unconstitutional, to be honest with you. So that that'll be another kind of interesting litigation if that statute is challenged. So he definitely does have more limited authority when it comes to any other city. But he, of course, does have authority to send in National Guard when there is some level of insurrection, anarchy. We saw it in Los Angeles just in June, actually, during kind of the anti-ICE, anti-immigration riots out there in Los Angeles in June. He sent in the National Guard, and there was litigation. Some left-wing judges were trying to stop it there. But he has statutory authority there under the Insurrection Act of the late 19th century, various other statutes as well. He absolutely has the ability to send in National Guard as long as you meet certain legal thresholds there. And that's kind of where the rubber meets the road there. It's going to be a very case-by-case basis, I would say.
All right. Josh Hammer, I always feel smarter when you're on the show. I appreciate everything you guys do at the Article 3. I love your show. Thanks for coming on, as always, guys. We've got a great show tomorrow with Jay Christian Adams, talk about election integrity and what we're doing to clean up the voter rolls to make sure that we have a smarter political system going forward. And then we've got an amazing panel coming your way on Thursday. Christina Bobb, Emily Sturge are all going to be here. Caroline Downey. Friday, John Solomon. What a great week and a great lineup. Thanks for being with us. My new column drops today on language the left is using, SeanSpicer.com. It is free. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.